fine.
He was not.
The cop literally said to me, yeah, man, it's the end of the quarter and we all got to get at least 6 tickets per quarter and it's nice out. So, we're all just out looking for seatbelts and phones today.
Well, thanks. Makes me feel so much better.
I mean, you got to love the honesty.
Right.
Like...
Welcome to I'd Buy That for $1, a podcast about inexpensive, common, and underappreciated records that are waiting to be rediscovered. I'm your host, Sean Plantain Hartman, longtime youngest member of the podcast.
That tracks. You are quite tasty, Sean.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I'm co-host Jeremy, and I just wanted to remind our listeners that just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you.
Gotta find a way.
A better way, even.
Well, I'm co-host Peter Cook, and guys, I really didn't come up with anything. It's been a wild day for me, and I've hardly had any time to think. I feel like I'm drifting, just like a ship out on the sea.
Aw, taxes get me feeling that way too.
Tax season, which we're time stamping this episode with that reference.
Yeah, I think it'll come out right around tax day, right?
Pretty close.
Well, on that highly entertaining note about taxes and tax day, I will now inform you all that I have brought a record to our podcast about records.
What record is it, Jeremy?
It is Jesse Colin Young, The Soul of a City Boy.
Jesse Colin Young. This is a guy I expected us to cover a long time ago.
We say that a lot. There's just too many people we should have covered a long time ago.
I guess we got to him. That's the important part.
True. We're here now.
Yeah, this is a guy I've considered picking for my episodes before, but I always kind of got stuck on which of his many excellent qualifying albums to do, and also, do we do a solo album? Do we do a Young Bloods album? And then I would just kind of give up and pick a different artist. But yeah, this guy's been on the list for a long time.
And ultimately, we just went to the very beginning.
Yeah.
Right at the top.
That's what happens when you leave it in my hands. We're going right to the folk album with just him and a guitar. So here's Jesse Colin Young. I wanted to start with Stranger Love.
And this is 1964?
This is 64.
Yeah, see, we'll obviously get to it, but I remember being surprised when I realized how early his solo career starts.
Yeah, and this is a pretty early album for us as far as we haven't done many albums earlier than this, so.
A handful.
Well, I want to start with Stranger Love, because I like it maybe most on the whole album. So I figured that's a great place to start. And that's Side B, track 5.
I'm walking down this highway, Lord, in a pouring rain, thinking of the lonely love I left behind. I remember the first day I wandered into town, all tired, sick and hungry, yeah, without a single dime. And she came to me, and she took me home, and she cared for me, yeah, she called my name, stranger, stranger, stranger love. You know, I loved her, yes, and I wanted keep her in my arms, but I felt that road calling me, and I knew that soon.
You guys may have noticed there, you got the standard elements, finger-picky guitar and some kind of heady lyrical poetry going on. But I think what attracted me to this song in particular are those strange, almost like modal shifts, and how like effortlessly his voice like navigates the melody over these kind of unusual chord changes for folk music. It's not as straight ahead as a lot of like Dylan was doing at the time or whatever.
Yeah, a lot of the folk contemporaries were not necessarily known for having the best vocals, you know, a lot of the greats. But this guy, it's like he's almost got like a crooner level vocal quality going on here. It's amazing.
Yeah, and in the context of this album, and even the other selections that we will be hearing today, some of them are more in a 12-bar blues framework. And
yeah.
This one's definitely outside of that.
Yep. And this is one of his originals, but a few of the songs on here are more like they are traditional songs, so he's following the pretty standard chord changes they're using. But I thought that one really shows off his voice in a way that puts on display what makes him special above other folk singers in my mind, is that control and that delivery that is pretty impeccable.
And it's amazing because of the people who are familiar with the name Jesse Colin Young, a lot of them might not really think of him as a folk musician.
Would they think of him more as like a rock or country or
Yeah, like a lot of his biggest hits from later on is more rock or pop based. I mean, like, and then some of his even later stuff gets into like disco and dance and yacht rock. And I mean, like, yeah, the Youngbloods were not this straight ahead folky. His later solo albums rarely got quite this folky. But yeah, this is like, Bob Dylan 60s folk straight up. Just him and a guitar.
Yeah, and there's some other selections that we'll be playing later on that, and the one that we just played even had this quality of almost being like a small label or private press folky quality to them. Like the kind of album that you might see promoted in the old Forced Exposure catalogs.
All right. Well, that makes sense with how this was recorded, which I will reveal later in the episode. But yeah, what you're saying makes sense to me, Sean, now that I'm thinking about it, because he didn't actually return to doing an album the way he did this one until 2020. So yeah, I guess that this is kind of unique in his catalog on that front.
Yeah. And I mean, you can definitely hear the folk and blues influence on pretty much everything he did. And it always had some pretty amazing guitar and some kind of finger picking, but like, yeah, rarely was he this straightforward, stripped down folk kind of sound.
Well, yeah, and as I said, I don't think I grasped until fairly recently that his story started so early. You always see those Jesse Colin Young albums, and I knew he was from the Youngbloods, and I figured that all that solo stuff happened after the Youngbloods.
Yeah, you would think.
Most of it did.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into his story, shall we? We'll put all the pieces together, make sense of it all together,
let's get together.
Yeah, let's do that. Since you said so, yeah.
Come on, people, now.
Oh, dear. Okay. Jesse Colin Young is not named Jesse Colin Young at his birth.
Oh, no?
No, he was named Perry Miller and was born in Queens, New York in November 1941.
He's effectively the same age as Bob Dylan.
Yeah. And yeah, you'll see his path kind of follows Bob's in a lot of ways.
We've had a few artists where that's the case.
Yep. Perry's father was a Harvard-educated accountant, and his mother was a skilled violinist and vocalist who had perfect pitch, meaning she could hear a note and just be like, oh yeah, that's an A. Like, yeah, that's a G, and just like pick notes out of the air. It's a not common skill for people to have, and it's apparently somewhat genetic, the ability to do that.
Yeah, I thought it was sort of innate.
Somewhat. It's somewhat developed and somewhat innate. Both his parents loved classical music and had him studying piano at a young age. I did not see what age. I didn't.
Probably for the best that you didn't see
I
what
didn't
age.
want to. I didn't want to be disgusted. But young Perry was also secretly listening to R&B and rock and roll music on his radio at night, which is where he grew a love for that type of music. He got a scholarship in his teens to go to a prestigious music academy called Phillips Academy. And that's where he actually began playing guitar. He signed up for a guitar class. His roommate there also was in the class, and they're learning guitar.
Oh, I thought you were going to say his roommate was Bob Dylan.
And his roommate, and that man was Bob Dylan. No. He was
Although he was a childhood acquaintance with Art Garfunkel.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, they were classmates in like 4th grade.
You're saying Perry / Jesse and Art Garfunkel?
Yeah, in Queens, New York.
Huh. Far out. Well, this guy was just some guy, and they would go back to his dorm room. And he actually got kicked out because him and his buddy would just be hanging out in their dorm room trying to do Everly Brothers songs and harmonizing and playing guitar and not attending their classes.
My kind of education.
The rock and roll education. Perry decided to, well, it's unclear to me if it was really Perry's doing by how this all plays out. It gives me the sense maybe his parents were pushing him, but he attempted to further his musical education by attending Ohio State University.
Buckeyes.
And he picked a place to live that was directly next to a record store, where he then was cutting class to hang out at the record store and listen to a bunch of music, further his rock and roll knowledge, and once again cut class. He then transfers from there to NYU, where he accidentally lands in the epicenter of the Greenwich Village folk revival in 1961, because NYU is located like right there in the midst of all that. So, of course, he doesn't take to school again. He ends up quitting in 1962 and decides he's going to pursue music full time. He didn't like having the name Perry Miller. He thought he would be associated with Perry Como. So he developed a new nickname derived from cowboys Jesse James and Cole Younger, and also the engineer of the Lotus sports car, Colin Chapman. So Jesse Colin Young.
It works well. I wouldn't have known it was that complicated.
Yeah. And it gives off cowboy vibes, even though you don't really know why, but
yeah,
it's because he's named himself after cowboys and a sports car guy. We'll pick up the story after the next song, but I wanted to feature the next song, 4 in the Morning.
Which this is the opening cut on the record, isn't it?
This is where Jesse wanted to start the record.
Which is a wild, dark place to begin.
True. And that's because he was in a dark place.
We'll get to that.
We will get to that right after the song, I promise. But here's side A, track 1, 4 in the morning.
Four in the morning and the water is pouring down. Stove don't work and the baby has just left town. I'm lying on my back 'cause it just ain't nothing to drink. Empty bottles on the floor and dirty dishes in the sink. Nothing to drink and the sun ain't gonna shine. I left my baby 'cause she just wouldn't stop lying. Well, I saw my baby and she took back all that she said. It don't make no difference now, 'cause I shot them both in bed. Jimmy Joe with legs and the knees all bandaged up. Came asking for some money and all I had.
That's the sound I was thinking of when I said that this seemed like the type of album that you might hear from an obscure, like lost classic singer-songwriter, maybe a Jackson C. Frank or F.J. McMahon, if either of you are familiar with those guys.
Yeah. I mean, you can just see the like record store hype sticker, damaged folk, lost masterpiece.
Exactly. Yeah, and here it is, the first track on a major release from Jesse Colin Young. I just had no idea. I love it. There's a whole lot of, you feel like there's a whole story there, and he's just kind of scratching the surface of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely dark, both in mood and lyrically, but if you're into this kind of thing, it grabs you right away. I mean, I remember the first time listening to this album, it's just track 1, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm way into this. And the whole album delivers, I gotta say. I don't think there's even close to a bad song on this.
Now that one is not an original by him.
That is not an original, but he also kind of lived it. This was written by Robin Rameli, and Jesse was running around with a loose collection of folky dudes in New York at the time.
Folk weirdos.
And they were living in like unheated apartments on the Lower East Side and just squalor and like basically the conditions he's describing in the song there. But I was shocked. The group, who called themselves the Bucks County Boys, included Michael Hurley, as well as Holy Modal Rounders members Robin Rameli and Steve Weber, a founding member.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a wild bunch right there, who I guess I never realized had crossed paths.
Yeah, they were taking their licks together, living in hardcore poverty, trying to make it as folk singers all at the same time. And Jesse said he he was never taught the song by Robin. He just kind of absorbed it over time, like hearing him play it a lot. It just kind of became part of his repertoire as well.
Yeah, and it's funny when I think of the Holy Modal Rounders, I don't think of something that serious normally. Most of the stuff I know by them is fairly kooky.
Yeah, that kind of became their thing. But yeah, this is before they were even the Holy Modal Rounders, and they were literally struggling to survive to the extent that at some point Jesse was like, all right, let's go back to my parents' house. And they all like moved back to where his parents were, who they like fed him and kept the boys alive after they were seemingly having a hard time keeping themselves alive.
Well, it's sobering to know that these musicians, who I think of as having gone on to success, were struggling that hard.
Yeah. Jesse was, not born into squalor, and his family had connections, which included getting in front of Bobby Scott, who was a record producer, and he got Jesse on Capitol Records.
With the help of another Bobby, right?
Oh, who's the other Bobby? I didn't write it down.
So Bobby Scott heard him play and then showed his music to Bobby Darin, and Bobby Darin is the one that actually made the record deal happen.
Oh, wow. I missed that little tidbit. Thank you, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
But Bobby Scott recorded it and really wanted to capture the raw energy of the Greenwich Village scene. So he put Jesse in front of two microphones, one for his voice, one for the guitar, and told him to play everything you know. So this whole album, Soul of a City Boy, was recorded in a single 4-hour session that he just did some real basic mixing on and then turned into Capitol the next morning. So there's very little polish to it. It's pretty much just Jesse playing the songs on a guitar in front of some microphones. That's why it sounds like it does.
Yeah, it's almost close to like a live recording sound happening here. Like you could just add a little bit of crowd noise and some glasses clinking, and you get the visual that you're hearing like a late night performance at a coffee shop in Greenwich Village.
Now, the copy that we're playing today is not a 1964 original.
That's true. This album, while critics did appreciate it and were like, this guy's good, it did not take off commercially at all. So there's not a ton of copies of the original.
It's that would be out of our price range.
That would be, yeah.
But the reissue, this is a 1974 reissue, did we determine?
Correct.
And these are abundant.
These are abundant because we'll stop dancing around it. Later on, he had a mega hit under the name The Youngbloods called Get Together. That was, the hippie anthem. Come on, people now.
Well, and we'll get to that. That even took some time.
That's true.
We'll get there.
True. We'll give you more info on that later. So after this was not really a commercial success, Jesse, took notice of what Bob Dylan was doing with putting together a full rock band and decided to follow in his footsteps and put together the Youngbloods, which put out the smash hit Get Together. That was released in 1967, but as Peter alluded to, it actually didn't get popular until 1969 when it was used for a PSA trying to get like religious people to be chill with each other or something.
Yeah, it was like the Christians and Jews Society or something like that.
Correct.
And then became a counterculture anthem.
Also correct.
Now, it was really initially baffling to me when I, got the sense that the Youngbloods were a New York band because that sounded so California to me. However, they relocated, didn't they, to the West Coast?
Yes, they started as a New York band, and from an interview I was listening to, he said that they really struggled to catch on in the East Coast, and it wasn't until they relocated to the West Coast that they started gaining some traction and getting more of an audience with their sound.
But they actually learned the song Get Together. Jesse nor nobody in the Youngbloods wrote that song. It was actually written around the time this album came out by Chet Powers, who performed under Dino Valenti, who would later be in
Quicksilver Messenger Service.
Correct. But that's not even where Jesse hears it. He hears it when he's living in New York. He goes into Cafe A Go-Go and just happens to walk in on Buzzy Linhart, I'd By That alum.
Wow.
Playing the song, and he just fell in love with the song immediately. So he went to Buzzy after he got done playing. He was like, "What is that song?" And he's like, "It's something Dino wrote." So yeah, that's where Jesse actually heard it originally. It was released on like 5 or 6 different albums before the Youngbloods did it, actually.
Yeah, I remember hearing that song on an album by the band H.P. Lovecraft, and it would have been right around the same time, I believe, as the Youngbloods released their version.
Yeah.
Or pretty close to it anyway. I feel like at least before it was a hit in 1969.
Yeah, Kingston Trio, Jefferson Airplane did a version before the Youngbloods version.
Yeah, it was a song that people were just kicking around before it really became, the generational anthem that we know it to be now.
Yeah. So after that's a mega hit, guitarist Jerry Corbett, who was a pretty important member of the Youngbloods, leaves the band, and that sends Jesse back into solo career status. So we'll pick up the thread from there, but let's play another song before we do.
Sounds good. What are you thinking next?
I want to play Suzanne next because pretty much any song named Suzanne is a good song, including this one.
There's the Weezer one, the Leonard Cohen one, this one.
That's 3 out of 3.
There you go.
And this is side A, track 5.
Suzanne, I've been crying night and day. Suzanne, I've been crying night and day. You know, I ain't seen the sun now, Mama, since you went away. Your love, yeah, you know it warmed my soul. Your love, baby, yeah, you know it warmed my soul. And without it, darling, you know my world is so dark and cold. Now you come on home to me, you come on home right now. I'm gonna go insane if you don't ease this aching pain, Suzanne. Can't you hear your daddy moan? Suzanne, don't you leave me all alone. Stop your rambling, Mama. Yes, truck it on home. I've been crying night and day. Suzanne, I've been crying night and day. You know, I ain't seen the sun now, Mama, since you went away.
I believe I've talked before on the podcast about how easy it is for when white people try and play blues music for it to just be a a big no from me. You know, usually they're trying way too hard. They're straining their vocals, and it just doesn't sound natural. But Jesse Colin Young plays the blues in such a natural way, like one of the best. It's kind of amazing that this album doesn't really get talked about too much.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a put on at all. The guitar is legit. Peter and I were talking while we were listening to that. He plays it like a blues guitarist actually plays, but then his voice, he's not trying to affect it like you said. He lets it just be his natural, floaty kind of voice.
Yeah, and from what I was reading, like his love of the blues and like this traditional roots music was pretty genuine. Like this was the time of the folk revival when some of like the original blues guys were still alive and playing, and he's talked about going to see Lightning Hopkins and actually like befriending him a little bit. He told a story about taking Lightning Hopkins to it was like maybe a motorcycle race or something like that. Like they would actually hang out a little bit. So yeah, he was all about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm guessing, of course, being in Greenwich Village at that time, a lot of those old blues guys were performing there too, coming through and touring there.
Yeah, a pretty magical time. Now, Peter, there's a Kinks song that it doesn't sound exactly like this, but there's just a couple moments with the finger picking, especially before the vocals come in, where it was kind of reminded me of it. Can you guess which one?
Milk Cow Blues?
Nothing in the world can stop me worrying about that girl.
Oh, yeah.
1965.
Yeah, I can hear that for sure. That's a good comparison. Clearly another band heavily inspired by the blues, but don't really go into the cringe territory with it.
True.
Well, I'm going to do what we do here when we've gone through most of the episode and there's still 50 years of a singer's career to cover, and just gloss over it all. In the 1970s, he was putting out some really good solo albums post Youngbloods. His album Song for Julie was one that I considered doing. I was between that one and this one. I might like Song for Julie a little more myself. I just thought the story was better to this one.
Yeah, there's a lot to love throughout his entire career. I was also listening to some tracks from his 1982 album, The Perfect Stranger, and you would think a guy who started in the early 60s doing this traditional of music, you would think that when he embraced synthesizers and drum machines that it would be terrible, but like he's still making incredibly interesting music even into the 80s.
I watched a performance of 4 in the Morning from, I'd say sometime in the last 10 to 15 years. I can't remember exactly when it was from, but he had really changed the arrangement and was playing it on a guitar that seemed to have some effects running through it. And initially I love 4 in the Morning so much that I was thrown off by the fact that he had reinterpreted it. But by the end of it, I was on board. He sounded really good still.
Yeah, he put out great stuff through his career. He was playing music and recording in the 80s, 90s. He launched his own label for a little while, and then there was like a fire. He was out in California, and there was a wildfire that took down his studio, so him and his wife left to Hawaii to start a coffee farm. He retired from music for a while in 2012, so a good, what would that be, like 50 years after he started?
Yeah.
Only because he was having complications because he had gotten Lyme disease at some point. He did eventually, though, unretire, and he toured with his son. He was like inspired hearing his son's band and decided to take his son's band out as his backing band, out touring again. And he returned to recording. And it was actually during the COVID lockdowns that he returned to this stripped down aesthetic. for a series of YouTube videos that were just him and the acoustic guitar again.
That might have even been one of the performances that I saw then.
Yeah, because most of his catalog, I think pretty much all his catalog after this has like pretty full orchestrations and full bands. You kind of see he's got that classical upbringing, so he naturally, I think, gravitates towards big full arrangements. He also had a short-lived video podcast that started after COVID. He's our competition, boys, called Tripping on My Roots, which the last episode of includes I'd Buy That alumni Jonathan Edwards.
Wow. Like he had him on the program?
Yeah. Yeah, he would talk shop with other musicians was kind of the thrust of the podcast. He passed away March 16th, 2025 at the age of 83. So, fairly recent.
Oh, yeah. I knew it was in the last few years, but I didn't realize it was just over a year ago.
Yep, very recent. He seemed like the last couple years he kind of wound down as far as doing music, but yeah, did it his whole life.
And this is where it all started.
And this is where it all started, 1964.
So he was, what do we say? He's like 22 on this album.
He'd be right about there. 22, 23.
That's all I got on Jesse. Sean?
Yeah.
That's your cue.
What could you possibly want from me at this point of the podcast episode?
To sound incredulous as I remind you to recommend for our listeners 3 similar albums by other artists.
Well, I know Peter thinks that I forgot, but I didn't.
I was listening back to our episode where I was like all over Sean. I'm like, wow, I gotta back off.
Or double down on it. I don't care.
Watch out what you ask for.
I'm ready. All right, so 3 similar albums. A 1964 folk album by an artist that we've covered before that's also very, very easy to find out there. I'm talking about Phil Oakes and his first album, All the News That's Fit to Sing, 1964 on Elektra Records.
Great one. Not nearly as good of a singer as Jesse, but unbelievable lyricist.
Not nearly. Yeah. It's still a masterpiece of an album and, sold a lot better than this one did. But yeah, the vocal comparisons are a little tough.
I don't know where you're going to find adequate vocal comparisons.
All right. Well, this next one is pretty darn good. So I was looking at what other albums around this time that Bobby Scott produced, the guy who produced this album. He's generally more of a jazz guy, and a lot of his work, especially in a couple years after this, is working more in producing and playing jazz. But around this time, he did a couple other, a little bit more obscure folk albums. And one that I found that I really, really enjoyed, I was unfamiliar with it before, Bonnie Dobson and her album For the Love of Him on Mercury Records from 1964.
Yeah, that's new to me too.
Yeah, I sent you guys one of the tracks off there in case you had time to listen to it, but very, very worth checking out. She's got a handful of albums. She was a Canadian singer-songwriter, most famous for writing the song Morning Dew, which was covered by many, many artists, including the Grateful Dead on their first album.
Is that the song? That's not the one that's like they call it that good old... No, morning. I'm thinking of Mountain Dew. This is Morning Dew. Yeah. Not the same.
Yeah, but very gifted vocally, great finger-picking guitarist. And yeah, she's got some incredible albums that are very worth checking out. Bonnie Dobson.
All right, I'm sorry I ever doubted you, Sean.
Okay. And last pick, a guy named Bud Dashiell. He did an album in 1968 called I Think It's Gonna Rain Today. It came out on Warner Brothers Records. Bud is a little bit better known as one half of the folk duo Bud and Travis. And he is, I believe, the first artist to cover a Jesse Colin Young original. He did a version of the song Lullaby, which came out on Jesse's second album, which I don't think we even mentioned. Jesse did one more kind of straightforward folk album solo before starting the Youngbloods. It came out in 1965. The album was called Youngblood.
That is accurate.
Yeah. Really good album. Also features John Sebastian on harmonica from The Lovin' Spoonful.
Yeah. Yeah, another guy that was kicking around a lot before making it big with a band.
Yeah. Jesse and John were friends before they got famous, and then their bands often drew comparisons later on. Youngbloods and Lovin' Spoonful. But the recommended album, Bud Dashiell, he is a French-born American artist, so he can sing in English and in French. There's a really cool range of sounds on this album. There's some traditional kind of American folk. There's some more like French folk. There's even some almost like tropical kind of bossa nova sounding songs on there, and he does a wonderful version of Jesse's song Lullaby. So cheap album, may not be super easy to find, but inexpensive and underappreciated and well worth looking for. I Think It's Gonna Rain Today, 1968.
Well, thank you, Sean. Those are ones I feel I should familiarize with as well. I didn't get a chance to check out anything you sent in advance. As I said, it's been a wild day for me, but if you don't mind, I was going to add one more to that list.
Please do.
And I actually don't have a good sense of how inexpensive this artist's records are. I feel like I've bought them for relatively cheap, but they may have gone up. Maybe they haven't. But I was thinking Tim Hardin 1 from 1966, which has one of his better known songs, Don't Make Promises, as well as Reason to Believe. Reason to Believe is a pretty famous song. Still I look to find a reason to believe. Someone Like You makes that song familiar at all, Jeremy?
No, you got to keep going.
Sing the Rod Stewart, when I was 13, had he did an unplugged where he performed that song, and it was all over the radio. Reason to Believe. But
all right.
Yeah, Tim
I believe you.
I don't know if either of you have spent much time with Tim.
No.
Just a little bit. Generally more of his later albums, that first one. But yeah, he is an artist that it's pretty easy to find his albums a little bit underpriced at times.
Yeah, some of the songs on the next few albums were covered by Scott Walker, like Lady Came from Baltimore and Black Sheep Boy. And weirdly enough, briefly, sometime in the 70s after Damo Suzuki left Can, and they were looking for someone to fill his shoes, Tim Hardin was briefly the singer of Can.
All right. Good addition.
So look out for Tim Hardin. There, you'll see his name around, if not that album, other albums of his. And I have yet to hear a bad one. There's always going to be some good songs on there.
All right. I got some more listening to do then, fellas.
There's a few more records out there yet.
We still haven't run out somehow.
Creeping right up on 300 episodes.
Oh, that's true.
And at some point I do think we could still cover a Youngbloods album. We kind of just breezed over their career, but that's a pretty fascinating band with some really good albums that are all cheap.
Yeah. I didn't really, until I was looking a little more into him, I hadn't really grasped that they really, like some of the other bands we've talked about, like the Linda Ronstadt's Stone Ponies, they had a big hit, but they didn't ever really find like their audience in their day necessarily. It was kind of the impression that I got.
Yeah, and some of it was because they kept making challenging music that was pulling from a wide variety of styles, so they weren't really like chasing the hit, and that kind of kept them from being as successful as some of their contemporaries of that scene.
Well, I was watching an interview with Jesse Colin Young fairly, in the last 10 or 15 years, and that's the time frame. Apparently, I did all my research was stuff from the last 10 or 15 years. He said that when Get Together became a hit for them, that was old news for them. So they'd show up to these things they'd get booked for, and if they could, they'd try to play something other than the song that everyone wanted to hear. But usually that's just what people wanted to hear. So it's weird to get attached to a song that's already old news to you.
Yeah.
It happens, though.
Well, I hope you, listener, didn't get too attached to us because we've come to the end of the episode. But I'm going to leave you with one more Jesse Colin Young track. That's Drifter's Blues. This one is a traditional song that he probably heard in like the record store by Ohio State or picked up off some folky in a gutter in New York or whatever.
This one definitely he does a good job channeling the desperation of the blues.
Yeah, he was living it, right before getting his break and recording this, he was living in squalor until he could barely live and had to go back to his parents to keep alive. So he comes by it honest. So
it's earned.
It's earned. So we'll leave you with Drifter's Blues. That's side A, track 3, and I am and was and will be co-host Jeremy.
And I am now and forever co-host Peter.
And I'm Sean Plantain Hartman. As always, thanks for listening.
You know I'm drifting and drifting. Yeah, it's just like a ship out on the sea. You know I'm drifting and drifting. Yeah, it's just like a ship out on the sea. Ain't nobody, yeah, ain't nobody in this whole wide world that cares for me. If my baby will only take me back again. If my little baby, baby, take me back again. You know I haven't got nobody, and I haven't even got a friend. I'll give you